we have Stephanie in Maine. Pronouns are she, her. Stephanie wants to point out, unfortunately, there is some pretty shitty legislation out there. Stephanie, tell us about it.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Well, there is some pretty shit. Hi, welcome. Glad to talk to Mr. Bundy, was it? Anyway,
you pig.
Yeah.
You pig.
I think, a whole bunch of the legislation that's running around the country with regards trans people, it comes right out of purity culture. It's like the purity of sex, the purity of gender. There's only one way, it's you're a boy, you're a girl. Yeah, this is how this goes, and you just hold up your stuff and all blah 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 blah. But I think it's really critical to point out, in your preamble when you were first talking, which inspired me to call, is like you were talking about the legalization of gay marriage, the legalization of the court decisions about allowing gay couples to do what they do in the privacy of their own homes. The difference between that and what's happening now is that the rights of trans people are being made illegal. We used to be able to do this stuff. We used to be able to consult with our physicians. Our families used to have the right to make medical decisions about their children without the interference of the state. The difference is now you're making trans people illegal. I mean, it's a positive thrust to make a part of the human community illegal. And this is different. It's fundamentally different. There's an affirmative program to take what we used to have as a basic human right and make it illegal and erase the existence of trans people from the public sphere in every way, shape, and form. And I think it's really critical that people realize that this is what's going on. It's really fucking important that distinction get made.
No, I definitely hear you, and I want to at least a little bit clarify for the audience my understanding, and correct me if you have a different one, but just to lay it all out there. What has happened in this past week is effectively that the governor's office directed the attorney general to issue a interpretation of existing laws such that in the future, when people look at the laws that are already on the books, they'll be able to apply them in this particular way. That is a recommendation from the Attorney General's office. It's not a binding definition of those laws. It doesn't add any laws that are already on the books. It just says that the highest lawyer in Texas says this is how we should think about the laws as they're already written. This is the way that we should interpret them. And then the governor went ahead and both doubled down on that interpretation and encouraged state agencies to actively use that interpretation. So it's important to recognize that no new laws have been written, that nothing specifically binding has happened, and that right now that interpretation, the one put forward by the Attorney General, has been stayed by a judge in one specific case and is going to be reviewed more generally sometime this week coming up. Does any of that contradict the way that y'all understand it?
I would like to add one piece to that
does.
too.
Totally does.
Yeah. Mm.
It contradicts it in that a woman who worked for child, but specifically what Greg Abbott did was order Child Protective Services to investigate caring parents of trans children for child abuse. And in fact, the lawsuit that Chase Strangio and the ACLU brought was in benefit to a woman who worked for Child Protective Services who has a transgender daughter. She was fired from her job. She was put on leave from her job, and Child Protective Services in Texas showed up at their home and demanded their medical records. It's far more egregious. That's the focus of the lawsuit, and that's what the judge stayed.
Right, but
So,
what I am pointing out and wanting to really clarify for the audience isn't that this isn't a disgusting thing, but how it's operating and what's actually gone into effect. I just want to be mindful about pointing out that there hasn't been any new laws written. Is that a fair assessment?
No, it's not, because in the new law that was written and was passed in I believe December of last year, basically was the thrust of the legislative bill was banning trans children from receiving medical care. Same thing happened in Arkansas. Same thing just passed today in Arkansas. I mean, this is not. I'm sorry. I don't want anyone to underestimate the fucking the thrust that trans people are under. All across the country. God bless the President of the United States and the Department of Health and Human Services, which just yesterday evening issued a statement saying, we're not going to let this happen. There is such a thing as HIPAA. There are such things as protection for these people, and we're going to put the full force of the federal government behind making sure that states can't do this. But you cannot underestimate the scope, the nature of the legal assault on trans people across this country in over half the states. So, I mean, Christy, God bless you for trying to for it sounded to me like you're kind of soft-soaping this stuff. But for trans people,
I think we're saying the same thing in slightly different ways. I'm just trying to be very specific about what's going on in the last week with this specific action by the governor's office. It is not at all to suggest that there aren't terrible things happening both here in the state of Texas and nationwide with regards to trans rights. But Kara, please jump in here.
If y'all wouldn't mind me jumping in real quick, I do want to kind of validate what both of y'all are saying there, which is yes, it's true that this was kind of the Kim Paxton, or who, I don't know if we're allowed to say politicians' names on the show, but
yes, we are.
I mean, yeah, he is the state's attorney general. There's no hiding that. Yeah,
that was sort of a reinterpretation of an existing law. But yes, to be fair, no new law has been passed, but the governor did go ahead with directing state agencies to investigate people retroactively, as if it were child abuse, for people who had sought medical care for their trans children prior to this decision being made. So they are going after people retroactively, which is, in my unprofessional opinion, not how the law works normally. But, this is something that we've been seeing in Texas lately, is a, attempt to go around the law in order to enact these, puritanical beliefs in what I would consider extra legal ways. And I mean, to Stephanie's point, that is a goal of the, purity culture, evangelical agenda, as it were, that it's not just to prevent sex outside of marriage, it's to prevent sex outside of what they view as, God's plan of who is supposed to be having sex. And the trans people, non-binary people, LGBT people don't exist in that framework. They cannot exist, and so they have to be erased in order for the logic to make sense, I guess. I absolutely agree that does appear to be at least the intention of some people to do that, and that does, in my opinion, align with the purity culture views. That was my experience as a young person who did not conform to necessarily either gender very well.
Yeah, and Stephanie, you are going to want to tune in this Sunday for the nonprofits because we talk about exactly this. We also we talked about the new "Don't Say Gay" Florida law that also kind of has some impact on gender identity. And we had Phoebe Rose on and student Dr. Ben. We had a good chat about that. I was just talking about that with Christy before the show. So definitely tune in on this because we're definitely bringing this kind of bullshit to the forefront and shining a light on this evil attempt to backpedal human rights. So I think you're right that the trans community has it pretty much the worst of any segment of the population. I don't think any of us would argue with you there.
Yeah,
no doubt.
Yeah, well, I think that again, I want to reiterate these are pieces of legislation that are rolling back our currently existing rights, and it's in a large degree very different from the fight to achieve marriage equality. What we're fighting is the loss of our ability to make decisions for our family, and particularly for kids. And it's really a damn shame. And
it's an attempted rollback. Absolutely. When we try to defend ourselves, I am gratified by the federal government's action, but we really need cis allies to realize the threat that we are under right now, because there are trans people. If you've got trans friends, you please reach out to them. Let them know you have their back and do something. You can't just say, I have your back, I love you. You have to start moving to stop these movements, because Alabama today, just the legislation to refuse medical care for people under the age of 19 passed the House, and it will be signed into law. And these bills are moving through state legislatures in over half the country. We need cis allies to do something to stop it. Truer words were never spoke.
And I really fucking appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about this, because it's purity culture. Once you let it out of the bag, is gonna take away people's rights across the board. Maybe it starts with us, but it's not going to stop with us.
Well, I really appreciate you calling in, Stephanie. Maybe we could talk about this a bit more in the after show. We do have a few calls waiting, so I do need to move on. But Stephanie, it is always a pleasure to talk to you, and I always enjoy your perspectives on what we're talking about. So thank you for your call.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.
Take care.
Yeah.
Stephanie, I always love when Stephanie calls, because she is so passionate, and you can hear that in her voice. And I mean, I would be too. I don't blame her.